Hello and welcome to the floor of my office. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, all of those things. What a year 2021 has been. It's been almost a repetition of 2020 in a lot of ways. I think a lot of us went into 2021 thinking it was going to be wildly different to 2020, and it just happened to be another Groundhog year for a lot of us. I read a lot of books this year from a wide variety of authors. A lot of that is thanks to the book club that I have been involved in called Book Talk Book Club on both Instagram and TikTok. We've developed quite a following over the last couple of months with all different opinions on different genres, and it's been a really collective kind of group of people coming together in a common cause of reviewing books, and some obviously we really love and others we don't like there's a lot of different opinions, which makes the book club so great. But thanks to the club I've read so many books. I've received a lot of books from authors. I've been privileged enough to read a book called Butterfly Bruises, which was a poetry collection, and that was a real standout for me in terms of poetry and literature this year. Something that I actually forgot to put into my 2021 book list on the Instagram of the Book Talk, but that's fine. But anyway, I am going to get into my top reads for 2021 and hope that someone picks up the book because of this. So my first book that I want to talk about, I should preface this as well with I own quite a significant number of physical books, but not probably as much as other people who are in this space, because I just simply don't have the room to own all of these books, nor do I have the finances to keep indulging this. So I borrow a lot of books from the library. I borrow a lot of ebooks from the library with different apps like Libby, BorrowBox, Overdrive, Cloud Library, and that really helps my reading habit. And then I also pick up secondhand books, and I buy a lot on my Kindle as well. So lots of different things. So I only have a couple of hard copy books, but that's fine. The first book and my top of the year is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And the reason why this is the top book of the year for me, 5 out of 5 stars, is because everything about it was phenomenal in my opinion. It was a very beautifully written lyrical prose. It had lots of really indulgent moments in terms of writing. It was so romantic, and she is a great writer, and it just made me fall in love with literature again. There's little snippets of artwork throughout the book as well, of different depictions of the character in different situations as she journeys through the world, and you are following Addie as she makes sense of her immortality. And the book is essentially about a girl who's born in France, in 17th century France, who is destined for a life, like many of women of that time, to become a housewife, a mother, go on this journey of women that happened and still happens to this day, obviously. And she felt very stuck in that ideology, and she didn't want to get married. She didn't want to have this life ahead of herself. She could see from her friends who are in this situation what it does to a woman and what it's done to her mother, and she just wanted adventure and she wanted to be free. So I really enjoyed that Victoria was able to take this concept of very modern day thinking and apply it to Addie in the 17th century, as she doesn't want this, even though back then probably a lot of women were indoctrinated into thinking that becoming a mother was the be-all and end-all of a woman's existence. Addie didn't want that. She wanted something more for herself. So there's this situation throughout the novel that is never pray to the gods after dark, because you don't know who will answer. And of course she goes and prays to the gods after dark, and a god answers her and grants her a deal. and that deal involves her having this immortal life, basically, where she can live for centuries, and she does in fact live for centuries. She sees time change, she sees humanity change, she goes through wars, sees so much, but her curse is that she can never leave a mark. She interacts with someone, leaves the room, and they immediately forget who she is. So it's a very unique idea. It's a very quiet book. It's not a fast-paced action fantasy. It's not your typical fantasy where it's always fast-paced, go, 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 quick, quick, quick. It's a very character-based, slow burn, slow unfolding story, and it switches between centuries. 1 minute we're in 18th century and she might be in a totally different country, and then in the 21st century suddenly we're in America and she is at a cafe, and it's constantly switching between different worlds, or different times I should say, and Addie's journey with coming to terms with that and meeting people and wanting to talk to this god because he is the only person who can talk to her and have a conversation. So their relationship forms over centuries, and it was my top book of the year because of the way it was written. It was so beautiful, and I would recommend this book to anyone who wants to get back into reading really beautifully written prose, because it's a complete standout for me. The second book I have is actually the physical copy. I got this from the bookstore and it's actually signed as well, which is very exciting. But this is called Empire of the Vampire by J. Christoph. He lives in Melbourne. He's an Australian author who has just earned enough, well, is earning enough money in recent years to write full time. So I think that's incredible when authors are able to do that, because writing is a very penniless journey sometimes, and a lot of authors obviously have to work outside of their craft in order to sustain things, which is why I'm so against book pirating, by the way. Anyway, this book is the complete opposite of Addie LaRue, and it is one of my top, my second of the year of 2021. The way I would describe this, and I'll go into detail about the characters and the storyline in a minute, but the way I would describe this is that it's very Witcher-esque in the fact that it's gritty, it's dark, it's brooding, it follows a very strong male protagonist who has a really FU mentality to the world because he's been really hard done by. The world has made him really hard, the circumstances that he is in has made him really hateful and bitter, and as a result, it just reminds me a lot of The Witcher, that grit, that adult themes, like really intense, you know, like fantasy, very fast-paced, very quick. This book definitely keeps going and going and going. There's never a dull moment. It's not like Addie LaRue where it's super quiet. This book is go, 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 fast-paced. Typical of your fast-paced fantasy, you know. So I will read the blurb to give you an idea of what this book is about. It has been 27 long years since the last sunrise. For nearly 3 decades, vampires have waged war against humanity, building their eternal empire even as they tear down our own. Now only a few tiny sparks of light endure in a sea of darkness. Gabriel Deloigne, half man, half monster, and last remaining Silver Saint, a sworn brother of the Holy Silver Order, dedicated to defending the realm from the creatures of the night. It's all that stands between the world and its end. Now imprisoned by the very monsters he vowed to destroy, the last Silver Saint is forced to tell his story. A story of legendary battles and forbidden love, of lost faith and friendships won, of the wars of the blood, and the forever king and the quest for humanity's last remaining hope, the Holy Grail. So the vampires are not romantic in this. This is not Twilight. This is very dark, Dracula-esque. The vampires are evil, full stop. There is different tiers of vampires as well. So the lower vampires are called wretched, and they are almost like a zombie-like vampire. There is the median vampire, which is kind of in the middle, that have lived for a while but aren't quite powerful. And the top is the ancient, which are just impossibly strong, impossibly fast. As if you could outrun me. No. they are top, and there's all different classes of vampires as well, different blood houses. So blood Voss, for example, I won't give everything away, but blood Voss is very strong, so then renowned for their strength. And throughout the book, we follow Gabrielle's perspective. It's written extremely well. J. Christoph is a brilliant writer. If you've ever read Nevernight, which is actually on my shelf over there, you'll know his writing style is quite different to a lot of other authors, a lot of fantasy, in the fact that he leaves footnotes for deeper understanding of his world building. But this particular book is written from a first-person perspective of Gabrielle telling the vampire, the scribe in the room, his life's story. And he says, you know, we started out here, I said this, this, and this, and it's going along his memories. And then it jumps to the room, and the room, which him and the vampire are in at the current present day, is written in third perspective. So we get Gabrielle said instead of I said. So the switching of perspectives is really cool. It's really well done. It flows really easily. It's not complicated at all. You're really following along with the story. Everything is laid out so well. The world building's really stacked onto itself. So it's very, very easy to follow. Sometimes fantasy books, you've got to get like 200 pages in before you even understand what the hell is happening. With this, you were in straight away. You knew exactly what was going on. It was very well structured and laid out. Very fast paced, very high action book. You're burning through it because you can't wait to hear what happens next. You want to know what's going to happen. So it's written incredibly well. It's a very unique story, I think, as well, because the Silver Saints, which is what Gabrielle Deloyne is, are half vampire themselves, which means that they need to feed on blood too. And they're very torn with this idea. So there's a lot of mental struggle. There's a lot of elements of faith and religion in this book, of, you know, the vampires are this demonic force, and so the faith of God will protect them from something. And of course, Gabriel has struggled with his own beliefs in God. He is under the impression that, you know, God has completely abandoned us. Why would he let this happen? Why, you know, and vampires run the country. Why would he let that happen? So he has absolutely no faith. His faith has been completely destroyed. And the Silver Saints as well have silver tattoos all over them, which means if they get bitten or they are in battle, the vampires have trouble with hurting them because they have silver embedded in their skin. So it's unique, it's different. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this book, and if you like really fast-paced, action-packed fantasy that's gritty, really Witcher-orientated kind of vibes, very dark and brooding, this is definitely something that you would enjoy. And it's a really chilling take on vampire lore. You're afraid of the vampires, you know. And another thing that's beautiful about this book is that it has artwork throughout the story. And I really appreciated this. This is something that has happened a little bit in different books. Addie LaRue has done it as well. But I really appreciated this because it gave you a perspective. There's two vampires there. They are so stunning. They're like that really royal-esque dress about them. Gothic, very gothic, very graphic novel, you know, vibes going on with the artwork. And the thing is like the books now are kind of verging on this artistic, you know, there's a lot of pictures in books now. And I really liked that because it gave you this perspective of, well, that's what they look like. That's what they are depicted as. And I can really envisage that character because of the artwork. So I really appreciated it. So that was my second top book of the year. Moving on to a author that I really, really enjoy reading from, Sarah J. Maas, A Court of Silver Flames. This is the, I guess, spin-off series for A Court of Thorns and Roses, which follows Farah. This, A Court of Silver Flames, follows Nesta. So we're moving into a different storyline, still involving the same characters, but more focused on a side character now. I really, really enjoyed this book. It wasn't the top of the year. My two have already been spoken about, but it was something that I really thoroughly enjoyed because I really like Sarah's writing. She has improved so much as a writer as well. I really, really loved Crescent City, which I read. Did I read that at the start of this year? I feel like I read that. I think I read that last year in 2020. But Crescent City was one of my top reads as well. It's actually here. I actually do want to own Sarah's books. I have to buy the box set, but that's Crescent City, and she has the second one in this series coming out. I'm actually going to the virtual launch of this book, and I've bought a hard copy of this as a pre-order of the second one. But I really like Sarah's writing, and she has improved a lot as an author. You can really tell in A Court of Thorns and Roses, it's almost like it's a completely different author, because she was really young when she wrote them, and now she's matured in her writing, and it's really beautiful. And I have to say that these books are very, very adult though, and what I mean by that is they contain a lot of very sexualized themes, smut as it's called in the book community, and it does take away from the storyline at some points. Like it does. I know that this is a really big thing that's happening in literature at the moment, with popular books, popular fiction, that it's really over-sexualized, and there's a lot of sexual scenes that are being written about to keep people involved in it. And that's fine. You know, I think that these books get a lot of flack because they're not supposed to be literary masterpieces. They're just supposed to be fun. And that's okay. You know, I've read some independent authors this year that write in this genre of erotic fiction, or smut as it's now been coined, and some of them have been really great in terms of handling certain themes and concepts in a book. The writing, of course, has not been strong, but that's irregardless of the point. The whole point about these books is that they're fun, they're easy to read, they scratch the itch, you know. So that was how A Court of Silver Flames read to me as well. The plot was strong. We follow Nesta as she journeys on this tries to heal from her trauma. She's a very toxic person at this stage. The world has made her really bitter and cruel. The circumstances of what has happened to her, the deaths that she has experienced, has made her into this very mean, nasty character. And I can semi-relate to Nesta in a way, and a lot of people didn't like Nesta, but I can relate to her and sympathise with her, because when I was younger I had some things happen to me as well, and it sent me on a path of semi-toxicity, a bit nasty, a bit mean, and it wasn't my true self, and it's not who I want to be. And so I nipped that in the bud after a year or so. I'm like, I can't keep being like this is really bad. But I do understand that with Nesta as well. And so there's this real build up of, you know, energy, and you can kind of feel it coming that she's going to break down at some point, and she does break down and unleashes, and it's really healing. And I think anyone who's been through some really tough mental struggles is going to really enjoy this book and really sympathise and empathise with Nesta's character. She forms great friendships. This book, for me, was really strong on female friendships, more so than romance. It does have a romantic element, but the friendships were so beautiful in this book between Nesta and her friendships that she forms. There were a couple of problems, obviously, I had. It's you know, like, certain themes come out that I didn't agree with, and I can't give anything away. But there were some things that I just thought were a bit meh done. I don't really know where the series is going after this. It seems a bit frazzled to end on this the way that it did. I think the next book might either follow the other sister, Elaine, or it might follow a completely different character, because the way it ended, it just can't follow on from Nesta, which is a little bit of a disappointment because I wanted to know more about it. And there were certain things that just were quite unrealistic with how much it was built up. The rite, for example, if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. The rite where they have to scale this mountain, it just seemed a bit far-fetched. But anyway, it's a work of fiction, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, there were just bits and pieces that I was like, a bit clumsy, you know. Middle of the book was a bit clumsy, and I just thought certain things weren't tied up properly, and yeah. So The next book is another one that I borrowed from the library. We actually, Maddie and myself have formed a podcast called Hey, Have You Read This? And we reviewed this book on our podcast. This was something that we thought was the top book of the year, and we've really struggled from that episode to move on to review other books after this because nothing is at that level. And so we've kind of gone on this downward from it. But it is called The Happiest Man on Earth by Addie LaRue. It is a biography, and sometimes biographies can be difficult to read because there is an kind of elaboration of truth. Sorry, my camera battery just died. But anyway, I'll keep going. So there can be this elaboration of, truth kind of that comes out of biographies. However, because this is about Nazi Germany and his personal experience with surviving a concentration camp, all of this was very true. What he went through is horrific, but the novel is about hope. It's about looking evil in the face and meeting it with kindness. And this book really shifted something in me because, like I was previously talking about with A Court of Silver Flames, being that toxic person or starting to become that toxic person because of what has happened to you based on trauma, based on people treating you poorly, and you internalize that, and in yourself you become cruel, you become the mean one, you become the bitter one. You're doing a disservice to yourself, and you're making them win by becoming something that you shouldn't be becoming. Your sensitivity, your kindness, who you are is a gift. Your empathy is a gift, your sympathy is a gift, and you shouldn't let anyone make you feel or make you think that that is anything but the truth. And with this book, The Happiest Man on Earth, it really cemented that for me. It really reminded me of no matter what happens in your life, you be kind to people. Everyone is going through a struggle. Everyone has baggage. What affects someone really deeply might not affect you, and what affects you really deeply might not affect someone else. Be careful of your words. Be careful of your actions. Everyone's fighting a hard battle. And just reading a book about this time when humanity was at one of its lowest in history of Nazi Germany, the genocide of the Jewish people, was really eye-opening. And I haven't read much on Nazi Germany before this. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas I've briefly flicked through, decided not to pick it up because I didn't want to feel sad. And The Tattooist of Auschwitz as well, I briefly picked up, but again I was like, oh, this is heavy. But this book was different because it's not, it is heavy, but it has this element of Eddie being, of saying to the reader, this happened to me, but I was hopeful. I had these really traumatic times. I lost friends, I lost family, and in the end I was able to be kind. And his beautiful face on the cover of this book, you can just tell he's such a kind man. And he actually recently passed away this year at 101 years old, so it felt like such an honor to read from him in his last year of life on this earth. And he left behind a real legacy with this book. He left behind a touch of his kindness, and I just think that's really beautiful. When he went through some really intense moments that deserved to be told, and there was real power in sharing your story, and I think more people, I would like to see more people do it. And I know that it can be traumatizing to relive memories, and it can also be really healing, but to put that vulnerable self of put that vulnerability out into the world to judge and critique and criticize is overwhelming. And that's why with this book, I loved it, I did, but I see a 1-star of this book, 1-star review of this book, and I think you can't, because it's someone's heart, it's someone's life, it's someone's journey. Biographies, audio biographies are very difficult for me to rate because it's someone's life. It's not fictional. So it shouldn't really be critiqued at all, in my opinion. But he goes through some really intense moments. He walks for 3 months to get to France, for example. And when he's there on the beach, he is turned away because he's German. He's Jew, but he's a German as well. And they don't want anything to do with him. And so he has walked this whole journey and then can't even get on the boat to get out of there. He loses friends. It's full on, but the way he speaks, the way it's written is, you know, hello, my friend, I'm going to tell you a story. And you're there. It's like you're sitting down and having a conversation with him, like he's there in the room with you as he recounts his life of this very difficult time. The next book is by an author that I've followed for many, many years on Instagram. She actually is a writing coach as well, and it's her first fictional debut that she has released on her own. She self-published this. She was turned away by a lot of publications, and she's been very vocal about that, turning away of how these publishing houses sometimes gatekeep art. They gatekeep what is acceptable and what is not, and it's very difficult to get published traditionally. And so she had many, many rejection letters, and she's built up this audience for herself over the years, and she's mainly sold non-fiction, so journaling prompts, procrastination, work for the burnt out artist. She takes workshops that are really nourishing for your artistic soul, because as an artist, as someone who is creative or a writer, it is very vulnerable to put yourself out there, to put your work out there. It hurts when you don't get noticed. It hurts when you're vulnerable. It hurts when you share something that doesn't get reciprocation. You need validation as someone who's creative, and I get that, and she gets that so well. So she's very in touch with that kind of vulnerability of creating. So this is her first fictional debut. It is called The Rules Upheld by No One by Amy McNee. It follows, originally it was called Elizabeth, but it follows a girl called Elizabeth. It's very religious. So her, Amy studied his history, but she studied sex in mythology and the history of sex in medieval times, basically. So there's a very strong element of that in this novel. And Elizabeth basically has these urges to touch herself, has these sexual urges that she has to overcome, and she whips herself, she punishes herself because she believes these urges to be a sin, and she's been taught that these urges are a sin, that we are not sexual creatures, that this is a sin to feel this way, this is a sin to be attracted to another person. And her parents really treat her as if she is committing this atrocious crime, even when she's had these thoughts. Just thinking about any kind of sexual content is toxic, you know, and she has to repent for her sins regarding this. And so straight away you can see the indoctrination of religion from the bat, and then she ends up completely going off the rails. And I won't give away what happens, but she does end up working, I mean, I'm going to give it away, but if I say that, but she finds sexual freedom. She finds power and control over those urges. She repents against what she's been taught, what she's been brought up, and she realizes that it's completely toxic, that she is the rules upheld by no one, that she is literally amending to these rules upheld by no one. Who created this? Who made these rules? You know, for me, why am I held up to these standards but my sister isn't? Why am I held up to these standards but my father isn't? And so she really starts to question this, and it's a really beautiful book. It's really well structured. It's written really well. There are some spelling mistakes every now and again, but Amy is a big advocate for fuck spelling mistakes, like just publish your work, which I love. And yeah, it ends in a really empowering female movement standard, especially for medieval times. It just becomes, Elizabeth becomes this symbol of feminine power, and because she was going to go to a nunnery, she was destined to be in a nunnery, in a sisterhood, and it explores that as well, how even in nunneries there were phallic shaped objects that nuns would use, and that wasn't considered a sin because it wasn't a male phallic, like attached to a male, it was wooden. So there's little elements like that I know that Amy took from obviously real life and wrote about it in her novel. I really enjoyed it, and it's not a genre that I would normally read. Historical fiction is not something that I like a lot of the time. I'm a very fantasy driven reader, but I've thoroughly enjoyed this. The next book I wanted to review is called The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Rees Jenkins. She is fast becoming one of my favourite authors in contemporary fiction. She, this is kind of about a take on Elizabeth Taylor, who had multiple husbands, and it's following a similar story of Evelyn has all these different husbands throughout Hollywood. She's a big star actress, and she's recounting her life to a journalist named Monique. And there's a tie between them. There's a reason why she wanted Monique to write this particular story, which you find out at the end of the novel. So there's a little bit of a what's going to happen that keeps you enchanted with the writing. It's beautifully written. It's all different kind of perspectives. Well, perspectives, not character perspectives, but different times. So similar to Addie LaRue, where we're following her journey not in a linear fashion. It's jumping between times. And so you're going back and forth, and you're always wondering what's going to happen. Who is she going to end up with? There's really beautiful moments, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I highly recommend if you like contemporary fiction, if you like elements of romance, and you like a really good solid story. Taylor Rees Jenkins has written many books that are really, really good. So highly recommend. The final book for 2021 is actually one I recently read from the library. It's called Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. It is a movie, as you know, by Natalie Portman. It's very thin. It's only, I think it's 160 pages. 195 pages. This is what I would consider strange fiction, a little bit odd. If you've read any China Mayville, you know what strange fiction is, your H.P. Lovecraft, that kind of thing. It is sci-fi, but it is also very weird, and so you're not quite sure what's going on. It really keeps you enchanted in that way. It has no names, there's no character names. It's literally the biologist, the anthropologist. It's a journal entry of their experience crossing into Area X. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. But basically there is this entity that comes to Earth. No one knows what it wants. So this group of scientists go out and try to study it, experiment, find out why it's here, what's going on. It's changing nature and the landscape before their eyes. And they are studying the patterns, and they get so involved in it that they realize that they're changing themselves. It's mimicking them, it's mimicking nature, it's confusing things, it's forming different creatures. It's like a half bear, half crocodile, half human kind of thing. It's quite scary in that way, quite thrilling. There's a lot in here for a very short book. Very quick to read, very easy to follow in a way, but sometimes I got a little bit confused between perspectives. I was kind of like, are we following the biologist right now? Are we following the anthropologist? And I think that's kind of done on purpose because the world that he's built is confusing. So confusing the reader makes sense in the fact that, like, if the characters are confused, then you would be confused because you're on this journey as well with them. So I really enjoyed this one, and I'm going to definitely read more Jeff Vandermeer in the future. He has a book that I borrowed from the library called Born, which is about a flying bear. But I really want to read this one as well. It's a biotech company that creates this animal that escapes, basically. But he writes very interesting, strange fiction, sci-fi, definitely my vibe. So they were my top books of 2021. I also read some wonderful other novels by all kinds of different authors, from independent authors that sent us work in the book club to published authors that were very, very good but just weren't top for me. Piranesi, for example, that won the Women's Fiction Prize. Very short as well. It's only a couple, like 130 pages or something. That won the Women's Fiction Prize in 2020. And people love it. People loved it. And it's definitely a novel that stayed with me in terms of themes. But I didn't go, oh my God, that book was incredible, you know. So there's been lots of different reads I've had, some that have been like quite surprising, others that have been like a bit disappointing and all kinds of things. But I'm looking forward to 2022, in which I read more books centered around strange fiction, fantasy, that kind of genre is my jam, and move away from some of the other books that I've been reading and just get back into books that I really enjoy. So if you pick up any of these books, let me know what you think. And if you've read any of these books, let me know what you think. I hope you have a Merry Christmas and a wonderful New Year, and I will see you next year. Bye.